Good morning to everyone.
Good morning.
I am glad you're here. It seems like we got more gone today than are here, so appreciate you being here. I got to tell you something. If you ever think teaching a adult class is hard, I was back in the 2-year-old class today, and I got to tell you, I'm amazed at Tana. And that's on YouTube, okay? Because I'm telling you, I mean, it didn't matter what animal or toy that those kids picked up, she had a song for it. And I was just amazed. I mean, wouldn't y'all hate for me to sing to y'all during class? So she does a fantastic job with those kids, so thank you. We're good, Keith, I think. Yeah, all of our computer gurus are gone today. So, what is love? Now, here's some answers to that question from 5 to 8-year-old kids. Love is when a girl puts on perfume and a boy puts on aftershave, and then they go out together and smell each other. Love is when my mommy gives daddy the best piece of chicken. And back in the day, that would have been the pulley bone. Y'all remember that? Some of you have no idea. Love, I like this one. Love is when you tell a boy, I like your shirt. And then he wears it every day. Love is when you go out to dinner with someone, you give them most of your French fries without making them give you any of theirs. Just 2 more here. Love is when your older sister gives you all her old clothes, because then she has to go out and buy new ones. This was a little boy. Love is when my grandmother got arthritis. She couldn't bend over and paint her toenails anymore, so my grandfather does it for her all the time, even when his hands got arthritis too. 1 Corinthians 13, and we know that's the love chapter, and remember that chapter ends in verse 13 by says this, and now these 3 remain, faith, hope, and love, but the greatest of these is what? Love. Galatians 5, love is the fruit of the Spirit. So what exactly is love? You know, it possibly could be the most misunderstood word in our world. And I think part of the problem is that we use this word to describe many things. I mean, we water it down by just overusing it. I mean, you can say examples, we'll say, I love my spouse. And we say, I love America. But then we also say, I love pizza. And I love my dog. So we use that word in so many different ways that I think it's kind of lost its meaning. And giving or receiving love is difficult when we don't understand what it is. A lot of people think love is a feeling. And you hear phrases like, it's a knot in the stomach. We had an instructor at Sunset, used to always call it a quiver in your liver. And you have that just ocean of emotion. But we know true love is so much more than just a feeling. Now, another misconception is that love is uncontrollable. Let me give an example. How many times have we said, or have you heard people say, I fell in love? Kind of like you tripped into it, and we assume love can't be controlled, or we say, I can't help it if I'm in love. Or maybe the opposite of that is, I can't help myself. And I've heard this so many times, it's so sad, I just don't love him or her anymore. But the truth is, love is controllable. And the reason why we know that is because Jesus commands us to love others. The love is at the core of it, I think, 2 things. First one is this: it's a matter of choice. In the scripture reading that Larry read for us, if you're still there in Colossians chapter 3, notice those two words there in verse 14, put on. Put on. Love is something that we can choose to have. It's a choice. It's controllable. But secondly, it's a matter of conduct. I mean, it's something that we do, right? It's an action. And I mean, that phrase there, put on, it's in that day, it meant the act of putting on a garment or a piece of clothing. I mean, let me give us an example. Our clothes, when we got up this morning, our clothes didn't jump out of the closet and onto our bodies, right? Without any help. I mean, we never get dressed by accident, even though if you go to Walmart, there's some people I've wondered about, right? Whew. But anyway, I guess that's a different lesson. But probably I shouldn't judge. I don't know. But it's always a result. I mean, you made a decision today just like I did. You know, the girls picked out my tie. Bentley wanted me to wear the other one, so she wore it instead. But in that same way here, this idea of a decision or action, Paul says that's how we put on love. Turn over to 1 John chapter 3. 1 John chapter 3. All of us know John, I mean the world knows John 3:16, but I'm not sure how many people know 1 John 3:16. And John's very clear. I mean, he says we know love by this. So he says that here's what love is. That we know Christ, laid down his life for us, and then it's kind of like he throws the ball into our court, doesn't he? And we ought to lay down our lives for the brethren. I mean, let's be honest, how hard is it for us to love others with no strings attached? I mean, giving up our rights, that's some of the last things that seem like we want to do in our society today. What about when it costs us? What about when it hurts us? And I mean, he goes on, look in verses 17 and 18. I mean, he gives this example, and he shows us how love is so much more than a feeling, it's an action. He says, whoever has the world's goods, sees his brother in need, closes his heart against him, then he asks a rhetorical question. How does the love of God abide in him? Little children. Don't you just love this? He says, don't love with just words, but how are we to love? In action. Yeah, in action. I mean, serving others with no thought of getting anything in return. And these verses that John writes kind of parallels James writing in James 2:14 and 17. When, remember, he says, if you see someone who's in clothing in need and you tell them, go in peace, be warmed and filled. Are we willing to help our brothers and sisters in need? I mean, biblical love, we know, it is a verb. I mean, yes, it does begin with that feeling, because we have to have that feeling of concern and compassion for those in need, but it always results in a tangible sacrifice. Always. I mean, I think too often, at least when I think of even my life, I mean, it's so easy to love with words, but not with actions. You know, but let me give you this example. Let me give you two examples. First one is, how many times have we told someone, oh yeah, we'll pray about you. But what if we were the hands and the feet that God wanted to use to answer that prayer. You see how sometimes we'll say, oh, I'll pray about you, but then we just go on with our lives. There's a young man said to his fiancée, I love you so much. I'd die for you, my love. And she replied, oh, honey, you're always saying that, but you never do it. Action. And we know the word that's always used of God is agape. I mean, that commitment to act. All right, let me ask us this question, which is a challenge. Is it possible to love someone that we do not like? Y'all are looking puzzled. Yes. Yeah, we're told to. yeah. Let's talk. Let's get first. Yeah, we're told to, but do we? And that's really what the rest of this lesson is going to be about, because for God to teach us to love, what usually happens is He puts us around some unlovely people, right? I mean, it's easy to love people who are kind and lovely to us. But if God's going to teach us to really love, to really do this agape type of love, He's got to bring some hard to love people into our lives. I mean, if we're honest, our lives are full of people that we necessarily don't like. Agreed? Yeah. I mean, we don't like the way some people talk. We don't like the way some people dress. We don't like the way some people, you can fill in the blank. And most of all, if you're like me, I don't tend to like people who don't like me. Let me give you another example. There's a lady by the name of, they called her Lady Astor. She was the first female member of the British House of Commons. And she did not like Winston Churchill one bit. They were constantly at odds. At one time she told him, Winston, if you were my husband, I'd put poison in your coffee. Churchill replied with proper English that only they would use. He said, Madam, if you were my wife, I'd drink it. Everyone is hard to love some of the time. But some people are hard to love at any time. Now, Jesus never demanded that we have this warm affection for everyone. I really don't know that He had that warm emotion for the Pharisees. I mean, we don't like to like everyone, but we do have to love them. So how do we do that? And we're going to look at 4 quick things here in this lesson on that challenge, I guess we could say, of loving the unlovable. Turn to Ephesians chapter 3. Ephesians chapter 3. The first one is this. We have to experience God's love before we can share that with others. We cannot give what we do not have. Okay? Ephesians 3, 17 through 19. So that Christ may dwell in your hearts through faith, and that you, being rooted and grounded in love, okay, notice what he says will happen. Verse 18, that we may be able to comprehend with all the saints what's the breadth, length, height, depth, and to know the love of Christ, which surpasses knowledge, Some versions say all understanding. So that you may be filled up to all the fullness of God. Three word pictures that Paul paints here. Dwell, rooted, and grounded. Now that word dwell just means to feel at home. The word rooted just means to, well, what it means. Down deep. Down deep in God's love. And then grounded, now that was an architectural term in that day that referred to a foundation. So here are the questions. Is God's love our foundation? Is God's love our root system? Is God's love our dwelling place? 1 John 4:19 says this, we love because God first loved us. So why is it so important to feel that love, to have that dwelling, that rooting, that groundedness? And I think it's just because unloved people that we come across are more than likely unloving people. And it's a challenge, isn't it, to give love to those people? And yet when we're rooted and grounded in God's love, what's that love going to do? It's going to come out. Second way, we've already read this verse, Colossians 3:13. The last part of that phrase, remember that Larry read for us, just as the Lord forgave you, so also should you. And by the way, these get harder, right? You know, it's not enough that we must just endure grief and refuse to retaliate, but he says we got to take that next step as Christians and forgive. Because he says very simply, if we don't, those feelings of bitterness will develop in our hearts. And who's hurting? We are. Yeah, we cannot give total love when our heart is full of bitterness. A bitter heart is just a divided heart. Now, I'm the first to admit, many people have a just cause for their anger, right? I mean, we've all had that. And they may have been cut emotionally very deep. In fact, I heard this week on the radio that, and this is sad to me, that in their lifetime, one out of three women will be abused in some fashion. And that's just one example of the hurt that's out there in our world. Now here's where it gets difficult. When we've been hurt, we have to let go. We have to let go of the past, or we will never move forward in the present. To be loving people today, we have to close that door of the past. And that cannot happen without forgiveness. I mean, forgive those who hurt us for our sake. I mean, not because they deserve it. They may not deserve it. But have we deserved God's love? Have we deserved God's forgiveness? No. You know what? The people from our past, they cannot continue to hurt us today unless we allow them to hurt us today by holding that resentment and bitterness. Forgive those who hurt us instead of rehearsing that hurt over and over again. We've got to release it. So experience God's love. Forgive those who've hurt us, The third thing, turn to Philippians 2, over a few pages. We've got to think loving thoughts. Philippians 2, 4, and 5. Jesus, remember, this is telling us to be like Christ. Do not merely look out for your own personal interests, also the interests of others. Then verse 5, he says, have this attitude in yourselves, which was also in Christ Jesus. Here's the main point I think Paul's trying to make here very clear. We have to look beyond ourselves. And that idea of thinking just those lovely thoughts about others, it means we begin to focus on other people's maybe needs, hurts, problems, desires, not just our own. You know, the old saying's been around forever. It's easier to understand someone when we've walked a mile in their what? Shoes. Jenny Curry used to always say moccasins. Never forget this. Hurt people hurt people. That is a fact. So if someone is hurting us, it's because that person is doing, they're hurting. And it's not always easy to look beyond that, but that's the challenge. And one of the hardest lessons in all this to me, the most obnoxious, think of the most obnoxious person that you can think of. And the person that you love the least or like the least. And do you understand those are the people who need love the most? Those people that we want to ignore are the very ones who probably 99% of the time need that massive dose of love the most. And it begins by us having those lovely thoughts. Number 4, last one, we need to act in love. Listen to this because it's so true. It's easier to act our way into a feeling than to feel our way into an action. Example, if we act as if we're enthusiastic, we will soon begin to at least feel a little enthusiastic. If we act as if we're happy before we know it, hey, you know what? Maybe I'm happy. I read this quote this morning and I loved it. It said, no matter how we feel, get up, get dressed, show up, just don't give up. How we think, how we feel is going to determine how we act. And that same formula goes along with loving others. One last verse here, and we'll wrap this up. Turn to Luke 6 real quick. Because this possibly, at least in my mind, may be some of the most difficult verses when you think of loving our enemies. Luke 6, 27 to 28. Jesus says, I say to you who hear, love your enemies. Number 2, do good to those who hate you. Number 3, bless those who curse you. And number 4, pray for those who mistreat you. And we're running out of time. I had a whole lot on that, but I'm not going to. It says what it means. What it says. You know what? Pray hardest when it's hardest to pray. And I've had people ask for, what do you pray about your enemies? And my first thought is, because I've had the thought too, for them to drop dead. And then it's like, no, wait a minute. I gotta back up on that, because they may be praying that about me. but praying for those soft hearts, for to be people of just peace. All right, let me close with this. You know, the last step, I think, in learning to love others, and I really do think this is the most difficult, but it's expect the best. Expect the best even of those we don't like. I mean, we think we live in a world today where they're expecting the worst. Why don't we look for the best in people? Why do we look for the worst in people? I mean, we can nitpick people to death with their wrongs. Love expects the best. And isn't it true? Have you found it that we live up to what people expect of us? And when we expect the best in others, you know what? That may bring out the best in them. Just remember, love is contagious. And it can change people. Romans 13:10 in the Message says this: you can't go wrong when you love others. So Wayne's going to come lead us in a song. I just want to encourage us. God has the power to change our lives. That's what this series is about. And I hope we look within our hearts today and ask, does He need to change my heart to become a more loving person? If you need to come, I want you to stand and sing.
Wandered far away from God. Now